Tanya Madison.
And I'm Jonathan Mason.
And welcome to Law Unfiltered, where we talk about a lot of current issues as well as the legal implications. So what have you been looking at lately, Jonathan?
So Sonia, over the last few weeks, we've been discussing the idea of talking about some sort of casual topics that aren't necessarily tied to a current event. And one of the things we had talked about doing was talking about like workplace attire. And then lo and behold, an issue just comes out of nowhere, and it's actually centered here in Atlanta. And it's, I mean, for lack of a better term, the sexy teacher who's not really a teacher, it turns out, or teacher bae. So for those who haven't heard, basically, this central issue is a teacher or teacher's aide here in Atlanta. She teaches fourth grade, and there's been a sort of a debate recently about her attire, whether her dresses are too tight. She's had some other photos where she's wearing jeans that are tight, and just so parents, people outside the school are complaining. And one of the reasons is because some of these pictures have appeared up on social media, and so it's just been an ongoing issue, and I'm sure it'll die out soon. I don't see it lingering like Colin Kaepernick or anything like that. But
until the next teacher,
right? Or unless the next teacher doesn't stand for the national anthem or the Pledge of Allegiance. But in any event, what I wanted to ask you though is, with your background in employment law, is it common for employers or government agencies to have dress codes, and if so, should they be generic? Should they be kind of specific? Like, how do you generally advise companies?
Yeah, particularly in the services industry, it is very common to have a dress code because you are pretty much the face of the company. You're going out marketing or doing whatever you're doing to customers, and so typically you will have either people give you a uniform or they tell you exactly what you most likely cannot wear versus what is acceptable or appropriate. But particularly as it relates to schools, I'd imagine they're just going to be general language of you must dress in professional attire, and then have this catch-all, discretion of your supervisor type language that then makes it, I guess to some degree, I kind of caution against, or at least make sure you train your supervisors on what is attire so that it's consistent application and not someone's subjective, I see it when I see it, versus making sure even if you didn't see it on one person, if you discipline someone else and they have a different body type and so it just looks differently, you're still disciplined for the same type of attire or violation of the same type of mannerisms that happen.
Okay, so this particular incident, as I mentioned, was here in Atlanta, and it turns out the Atlanta Public Schools, they do have an employee handbook.
Right.
And the standard for dressing in there is incredibly general. And it seems to give a lot of discretion to the lead administrator, I guess usually a principal in the school. But when you dig a little deeper and you go into some of the documents, and I'm looking at, this is from the board policy manual, and it's titled Employee Dress Code, they get a little more specific. And they have a list of what includes appropriate dress, and they have a list: shirts, dresses, slacks, blah blah blah. But then in the next paragraph they talk about what is considered unacceptable, and they have things like, I'm not going to go through the whole list, but shorts, jeans, hats and head wraps, and then you get to one that says immodest dress, such as a dress which is too short, and then they define too short, meaning more than 3 inches above the knees. But then they have tight or otherwise revealing. And so when I read that, I thought, well, tight, what's tight to one person might not be tight to another. So how do you deal with sort of these subjective, type of terms when you're trying to enforce a
back
code?
to the case that we're talking about at hand, there is a picture of the same dress being worn by 3 different women. And obviously, the woman that we're talking about in particular, people have deemed that tight, whereas the other 2 dresses, people would say, well, may or may not be tight, just depending on what people consider tight in their subjective beliefs. And so that's the problem that happens when you're talking about an application of a policy, is that it's only going to be applied based on a human or subjective term. And so this would hinder it problematic, because like you said, who's going to define tight and who's going to define revealing? I mean, is revealing just exposure of skin, or is it exposure of your actual curve? And when it comes to tightness, okay, what is tight on a man, is that going to matter, or is it simply what's tight on a woman? And then you get the application of the policy. Are we disciplining women? Is it a policy that is disparately impacting women more than men, or disparately impacting minorities more than the majority, or more than the white people? Then that becomes a problem. And so in this particular setting, I know that the Atlanta Public Schools just released a statement saying they kind of advised her on the policy, which to me just means they said, hey, we do have a policy, make sure you're mindful of that, as well as the social media aspect of it. But it does become, I'd imagine this wasn't the first time she wore it when she posted on social media, so I'd imagine it wasn't a problem for a while, and it didn't become a problem until the public backlash came upon her.
Well, part of me feels like she brought this on herself somewhat by posting pictures of her from the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to find the social media policy, for the school system, and it wasn't successful, but I would imagine that they've advised her not to post photos from the classroom.
Right.
I mean, because to me, that probably what made it more, I mean, if she had just, well, I take that back. I was going to say, I've heard of other instances where teachers have been disciplined, even fired, for things that they posted on their social media pages that had nothing to do with their classroom. Sometimes they were like in foreign countries on vacation having a drink, and they posted it on their Facebook page and got fired because of it. And we can debate whether that's a good policy or not. But in this instance, I think the fact that she had pictures in the classroom, even though the ones that caused most uproar didn't have any kids in the photos, mm-hmm. but still, I just think that the school would rather not have teachers and teachers' assistants posting photos from their classrooms.
I dare say
regardless
most
of
employers would rather their employees not post anything about their employment, on social media. Social media policies are still dictated by the law to some degree. And so, I mean, while I'm sure they probably in their own way said, hey, don't post from the classroom, technically that they can't necessarily say that, because, if she were to post about a workplace issue and she's talking to her colleagues about it and her colleagues converse with her, I was hoping you wouldn't be able to see it. Well, and her colleagues converse with her about that policy, then, that's considered protected activity, and they can't terminate her for that. But I do agree with you in the regards that, once she clearly changed her settings, so something was said and she changed it to a privacy account. But at the same time, if she were at the beach, in a bikini, or if she were, at a party or at, some other event with the same outfit, this wouldn't even be an issue. But it is the fact that she's in the classroom. People are pretty much saying something by virtue of the fact that they feel like, well, this is what my fourth grader is saying,
right.
And not necessarily, I don't like what you have on.
Yeah, and I think it also probably would go back to whatever the exact social media policy that school system would establish, because from other cases or seminars or classes I've taught, the school systems had various detailed, specific guidelines for what you can and cannot post on social media. So even if you were on vacation in Italy and you were showing a picture of you drinking a glass of wine, yeah, under their documents that gives them the right to discipline you.
Right.
Which again, may or may not be a good policy. But one other thing you mentioned earlier is you talked about in the service industry, because you're kind of like the face of the company, and that's part of the reason for these policies. But what about the fact that, what about if it's not technically a public service type of, or it's not a consumer where you're dealing with the general public, but what about what about the dealings between employees? Like what if her attire makes other teachers uncomfortable or makes administrators or parents who are visiting, although that's kind of like the public. But,
Right.
But what about just employee to employee? Does that come into account in dealing with these policies?
Employers, including public employers, they can have a policy. I'm not saying that only people in the service industry can have a policy. I mean, all employers can have a policy. It's just a matter of making sure you're not using that policy to discriminate against a group of people, particularly protect a group of people. So if she were to get in trouble because of what people are saying, I would advise the employer to make sure you are specific to the complaints and not it's because of your attire. So in other words, if for her sake, if it was the fact that, listen, we've got the backlash, we've got parents complaining, we've got officials complaining, I'm not disciplining you because you're wearing this. I'm disciplining you because it is harming our image, or it is because it's distraction to our purpose. And our purpose here is to teach the children as well as to work cohesively with parents and administrators to make sure we meet that goal. And so keeping it tied to the job at hand versus away from your own subjective beliefs is always helpful when trying to institute or manage employees.
Yeah. And one other thing that you mentioned earlier was about a dress may fit one, may look tight on one person, but at the same time, she could wear that same dress and buy a size larger,
right.
and it wouldn't be considered tight. So I don't even necessarily think it's the dress itself. It can be a matter of, well, you should, I'm not going to say lose weight, but wear a larger size dress, because then it won't be so form-fitting and it won't, possibly violate that. But that just makes me feel uncomfortable, like as an administrator.
You would probably want a woman to talk to a woman about that, because it's not necessarily, it's the curves, right? I mean, the dress probably fits her correctly. It's just that one body type has curves and one doesn't. And so saying, well, just get a larger size. Okay, well, a larger size is still going to show her curves. It's not like it's going to make her body non-existent.
But yeah, I know, but it's a difference between showing curves and being like form-fitting, just, no room to spare.
Right.
I can't really describe
it. But
it.
I'm also saying the person who doesn't have curves could still have a form-fitting dress. It's just that you don't, you personally, but someone may not see it as,
I agree with that
revealing
too. I agree with that too.
Because there's no curves.
But it seems maybe even unfair, but the person, I guess, who's curvier has more responsibility to police what they're wearing because of their body type. I guess that's what we're saying.
Maybe that may be true, but that's why I caution employers, you still need to make sure you're consistently applying it, because if it comes out that it's only being applied to a minority group of people, then people are going to argue, well, this policy was pretty much only for us, and it is therefore discriminatory towards us. So you shouldn't look at, well, I did it because you have curves and this other person doesn't. Well, it doesn't matter. If it was form-fitting or tight on this person, it shouldn't matter that I have curves and she doesn't. You need to discipline her or tell her equally that that's an inappropriate dress.
Okay. But I think we're still talking about two different things. An inappropriate dress might be because it's low cut, and it's going to be low cut regardless of whether you have curve. In her photos, she didn't really have any low cut dresses on. They were just, by some, considered tight. So I think I understand what you're saying. So there's an issue of, there's an inappropriate dress, and then there's an inappropriately fitting dress. I guess that's what I'm saying.
But even with the low cut argument, you could put two different women of two different body types with the same low cut, and some people would say, oh, well, this low cut is more inappropriate because she has just more chest, and it becomes in their mind more revealing than someone else who
but I think
has
that's a clear issue, because it's like, for example, they say short, I like the fact that they define short with an objective criteria. Low cut, I mean, it is a little more problematic.
I can say it depends on the application. Again, you can have two people with a low cut dress, and yet one, it just seems more revealing than the other.
I understand that, but I think if I've told sexy teacher that she can't wear that dress because it's low cut, and another teacher has that same exact dress but doesn't have the same build, then I don't think for consistency, that other person should be able to wear that dress if you've already deemed that dress to be
Well, that's why
inappropriate.
I caution. That's why I caution, because again, it's going to go back to the disparate impact. If it turns out that the majority of your, I guess, let's say African American women or Latino women have the curves that make that same dress inappropriate, then they're going to argue this policy of revealing or low cut or whatever was targeted at us, not as a consistent application all around. That's why I'm like, discipline them all, but none of them can wear this low revealing dress just for the sake of, a clear application of what you're really meaning.
Right. Okay. I agree. And maybe there's some people out there who've had situations either as an employer or as a coworker where someone's attire has caused an issue in the workplace. If you have, go ahead and leave us some information in the comments about what your experience was.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for bringing that one up. I thought that was a good topic, and I hope you guys enjoyed it and tune in for the next one.
All right. We'll see you next time.